The Monday, October 14th, 2019, regular meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission. We please have the roll call.
Chair Rudnicki.
Here.
Vice Chair Schwartzbacher.
Here.
Commissioner Reynolds.
Here.
Commissioner Stallman.
Here.
Commissioner Almond. Commissioner Coronado.
Here.
Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Okay, we do have a quorum. Next up is Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd all please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next up is the approval of the agenda. We have one item. Is there any changes to the one item? Craig shaking your head no? We're fine? Okay, good. Next is the minutes to be approved from our last meeting. Certification of September 23rd, 2019 regular meeting minutes. All had a chance to read them over. Do we have a motion for approval or do we have a discussion for changes?
I move to approve, based on the clerk's certification, the September 23rd, 2019 minutes of the Littleton Planning Commission.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay, please vote.
Dan.
The vote is 6 in favor. The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
You waited to see how other people were going to vote?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had some concerns on that one.
Rather sneaky of you. Okay. Next up is public comment. These are for any items not on tonight's public hearing agenda. If you're here to speak about the Comprehensive Plan, Transit Master Plan, we wait until you. We ask that you wait until the hearing when we'll have a speaking section there. Do we have a list? Okay, we have one person, Pam Chadbourne. And by the way, if you haven't signed up and you wish to speak about anything, we'll ask at the end of the 3 minutes here.
My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here. I want to talk about planning. I did planning for government projects in my professional career, and I think I know something about it, and that's why I'm going to be so bold as to say that the process that was followed for the Envision project is not compliant with what I know as good planning, and I'm going to describe good planning so that you understand why. When we do project planning, we start out with concept development, and we look at a number of concepts at a high level. An irony here is that in the past, when we talked about the comprehensive plan before, remember when Glenn Van Nimwegen was here, he talked about the 30,000-foot view, and that's not your final plan. That's your concept level consideration, and you have, oftentimes this is competed for NASA, you get a lot of concepts in and they're from different people and they're about an objective. We want to go to a certain place and study it and get certain science. So competitors assemble concepts. Now, we evaluate them. NASA has a group of people who evaluate these concepts. And then 40% of the evaluation is feasibility. Can they even get it done? And the it is what we, NASA, the people, have declared as our objective for that mission. Now, once you've down-selected some concepts, then you get into more detailed understanding of what you're going to specifically do. And that's a preliminary design phase. And again, you share a lot of information about what you're doing, and it's evaluated both at the subsystem and system level to see if we're achieving our goals and if it's realistic that we can. And finally, after we get some preliminary design done and we know that we've got some workable projects, then we pick one and we start to talk about detailed design and we integrate that. And I'm going to tell you, at that point, you can start to test your ideas and say, is this really going to achieve, by working out what-ifs scenarios. And finally, when you get to the point where you know it's going to work, you document. A plan is a document of all this that came before. And that's what we do in order to not waste taxpayer money, at least at NASA, and not to risk lives if it happens to be a human-occupied mission. I'm going to point out that a city is a human-occupied mission. It matters to people what we do. These are not just documents and not just words, and it's not just your chance to put your ideology on paper. Thanks very much for listening to me.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on a topic that's not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. General business, we have none. Now enter into our public hearing. This is PC Resolution 12, 2019, recommending adoption of the Envision Littleton Comprehensive Plan. Just to let you know what the process is going to be, a little bit different in that the city is the applicant. Staff will be making their presentation. I hear there's going to be a bit of a video. Planning Commission will then ask questions of staff. We'll then open it up to public comment. After the public comment, we'll close it, and PC Planning Commission will discuss and make motions for adding amendments to the main motion. Can we please have a presentation from staff?
So there are multiple people here that will be presenting as part of the staff presentation. So bear with us as we go back and forth. So I'm really just going to talk about why have a comprehensive plan and what it means to staff to have finally one truly comprehensive plan. As we all know, we went through a visioning process, and that comprehensive plan provides that vision for the future of our community and what steps we're going to need to take to achieve that vision. Without having that, from a planning perspective, we're at a little bit of a loss. So for us, having the current comp plan that isn't 40 years old, and many would argue that, okay, the comp plan isn't 40 years old. We have had some updates. We've had a series of plans. But what we were finding as staff is there was a lot of contradictions as those layers started to occur. So having a full comprehensive plan that has everything in one place is huge for us as a staff. But without a comprehensive plan, there's no framework for the best land use decisions and really kind of your big picture land use decisions. We're having a struggle. Is it on? I clearly need to eat the microphone. And this is a struggle that we're having as we have some larger pieces of land here still in Littleton that need to be developed or figure out what we want to do with them. And we don't have a clear direction as staff as to how we should guide development on that land or the developer. It's also difficult to put new technology and best practices in land development into place when we have a document that is as old and as disjointed as the one that we are working with now. We also come from then a more reactive place in our planning and how we evaluate things rather than a proactive place. So as staff, we are very excited to have the Envision Littleton Comprehensive Plan, which includes the Transportation Master Plan, as well as a future land use map to help us as staff be able to guide developers knowing that what is in this plan, as well as the transportation plan, is what the community wants. It is what we have heard from the community. We have spent 18 months developing this and working with the community to get to where we are. So just as a staff person, we're very excited to see this come to fruition. So a big part of this Envision Littleton process has been the work of Kathleen and working very closely with our amazing consultants, Kenda Keese Collaborative. We have Gary and Meredith with us tonight. So they're available for any questions that you might have. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen to kind of give a little bit of a summary and introduce the video that we have put together.
Good evening, Chairman Rudnicki and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Kathleen Osher, Manager of Innovation and Performance Excellence. It's my pleasure tonight to bring the Envision Littleton Comprehensive Plan, which includes the future land use and character map and the Transportation Master Plan for your consideration to recommend adoption by City Council. We have prepared a recap of the process for you this evening, so we'd love to show you that video. I think I'm going to get some assistance from Tyler. Okay.
From the start, Envision Littleton demanded that we do things differently. Unlike other communities that spend about their first 6 weeks talking about what they'd like to achieve, we spent about 9 months listening to the stories, memories, hopes, and dreams that our residents and businesses had for the next 20 years. We went out into the community with giant ears and a really large notebook to listen some more, and capture all the notes. All those notes allowed us to create a roadmap for the next 20 years. But we didn't get to this point without more partners than I can name. Thanks is due to so many, but none more than our residents and businesses. They approached this whole effort with such passion and generosity of time and ideas. The amazing results are a testament to our founders, past civic leaders, that enabled our community to prosper and navigate through periods of both incremental and phenomenal change. We also owe a huge thanks to all the thought leaders that have taken part in our 4-part speaker series. Chris Akers, economist for the State Demography Office, laid out the realities in the region and state, which allowed us the chance to debut the existing conditions data books for Littleton. One of the most informative steps in any long-range plan is to investigate and validate what is truly happening in the city today. This gets everyone on the same page of where we are now before we start talking about scenarios for where we are heading.
If we think about where we are right now in Littleton, and if we tried to draw like a geographic center of where all the growth is, it would almost come right there at that confluence of Arapahoe County, Jefferson, and Douglas. So if we think about it, you're right in the heart of where most of the growth has been occurring, and part of that's due to your proximity. You could get up to Denver in 33 minutes if everything goes well, and you get your parking spot and the like there as well. You can make it down south into Douglas County in considerably less time, and even onto El Paso County. So you have a good location there, a lot of good north-south corridors there for transit as well.
Then in April, I think one of the most impactful moments was hearing from Darren Atterbury and the story of Fort Collins on their path to gain vision clarity.
People love this place. And that's one of the things I wanted to share too, is that, I'm coming from Fort Collins where people say, they really, really like, or they really, really love their community. 90+% of our residents feel that way. That's here too. And so, maybe some of the things that I've shared is just, it's you sharpening your blade. It's not a complete overhaul. It's maybe there's something that's going on in Fort Collins that might be applicable here, or maybe and some of these statements have been really helpful for me too. It's just your narrative is so important. What message are you sending to your community about the future of Littleton?
We also set the stage with Brett Keese for the important work of 2020 and 2021 to update our land use codes and zoning.
Each of you have the opportunity to have your fingerprints on the future of this community by being involved, by sharing your voice, by sharing your ideas. And that's the real value of this process, and that's one of your core values, is engaging and involving and bringing people together. One of my favorite quotes is that it takes a community of differences to make a difference in the community. So if we were all alike, it would be simple, but it may not be the best outcome. It's the sharing of ideas, and that's what creates community. And so it's very valuable that we work together to identify what we want Littleton to be in the coming years.
Even with hundreds of events and thousands of conversations, we were constantly looking for any and all opportunities to engage our residents and businesses. Again this year, we had the chance for the community to check our work once we released the draft comprehensive and transportation master plans on August 8th. During this public comment period, we held a telephone town hall. It's like a radio talk show. You sit in the comfort of your home, and we bring the town hall to you. We called out to residents, and within a matter of seconds, we had a town hall with 365 attendees. What was most impressive was that attendees stayed for the town hall almost 35 minutes on average. Together, they spent almost 2,500 minutes in total. To bring all this incredible community spirit together, we hosted our fourth, last, and final speaker series with the dynamic, charismatic, and inspirational Peter Kagayama. Peter's an author and innovator that works around the nation to bring more love and creativity to how cities engage their co-creators. Co-creators have been instrumental to our process. We know the partners that helped us envision Littleton in 2040 will continue to be vital to realizing all we are striving for over the next 20 years.
I think the key thing to remember, it's like regionally we work together, but there is something about a pride of Littleton, a pride of place, that you want to have sort of your own unique identity within that greater conurbation, that is the Front Range, and hopefully, clearly you guys do. It's like, then it goes back to asking that question, what is it about us, what is it in our DNA, what is it in our principles that made us Littleton? And how do we sort of, maintain that and use that to carry us forward for the next 20, 40, 60 years?
Starting last year, the passion and emotional connection for everyone in our community was so important to our success. The relationships we built and the champions for Littleton that emerged will be the stewards of this vision and plans. We will continue to honor the amazing past, reflect on what is happening today, so that we can proactively look to the future. In 2020, we will focus on bringing both the comprehensive and transportation master plans to life. The clarity of our vision will allow us to break down silos, think about all that makes the city tick, so that we can align the resources we have to achieve the results and benefit everyone living in, working in, and visiting Littleton.
As you'll remember, Envision Littleton began in April of 2018, and the last 18 months have included 11 meetings here with Planning Commission, 8 joint leadership sessions, study sessions with City Council, and a true dedication to hearing from the community as a whole. The project in 2019, so this year, was broken into 5 phases. And the 2 consultant teams, Candid Case Collaborative and HDR, worked to combine those milestones and include community engagement with each phase. So both documents were made available for public comment and review starting August 8th through 5 p.m. on September 16th, and we received over 100 submissions, which included hundreds of comments. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions for this evening.
Thank you. Let's start here. Dan, questions for staff?
Well, you've answered one. I was looking back at the 2014 citywide plan and was looking at the public engagement process there, and it appears that this new process or the new plan has surpassed that engagement, which I thought was pretty interesting. I thought that was an interesting figure. I don't have comments or questions at this time. Thank you. Other additional?
Great.
I guess the only question I'd ask is how, in the process, did we compare to other cities or use comparisons with other similar cities, especially within the Front Range area and elsewhere, in our sort of developing the way that the plan was put together?
Yeah, so you may remember, so the project started in April, I came on board in May. One of my first tasks was to sit down with our neighbors and other cities in the region to understand both their process, borrow some really great ideas in case there were some, but also really kind of understand how to set expectations. I think what we generally saw is for our online survey, for example, which is a huge input to last year's work, there we had about 2.5% of our population respond. We were seeing on average in other cities that it was about 0.5 to 0.75% in those responses. So I thought that was a good benchmark for us. Some of the other comparisons, of course, I think you may remember that I've mentioned a few times, not many cities approach the length of time that we dedicated to really having a conversation about vision. And so the last community that I can find in the metro region was Castle Rock. So they did a 2000 document to talk about a 2020 vision. But creating that standalone document was something very unique in the context of our other neighbors. I think the other things that I learned along the way were some of the models that we looked at were Arvada, Longmont, our neighbor Centennial, Inglewood. From all of those communities, I think we far surpassed the level of engagement that we saw from those projects. But what also became really interesting, Centennial, for example, I think their staff shared with me that they had 6 comments when the draft documents were out for review. And so, obviously with over 100 submissions, well beyond that as well. So I really think that in terms of learning early on in the project of the types of numbers that I really felt like we should be achieving as a city, particularly for a city of our size, I think that we reached a lot of those. Is there room to grow? Of course there is. There's always more opportunities. But I think what I kind of view the appendix on the engagement piece, it's a great starting point. I think it really built some long-term relationships because, as the video mentioned, the most important next step is really maintaining that level of stewardship for the community to kind of see these plans through.
Thank you. So in terms of sort of benchmarking against other communities locally within Colorado and even nationally, I know we have a national consultant on board. How does, I guess, the length of time between the time we do comprehensive plans and others compare?
Yeah, so what I learned from most of the communities here in the metro region is 18 months is about the average. I know in the case of one of our neighbors, they did take 2 years, but they had a change in consultant team that affected their timeline. So that was one thing I was really thankful for. So, because that obviously changes the timeline quite a bit. But most of them, 18-month process. Many of them are updating on a very regular 5-year cycle. So I think that does create a different experience than what we were having here in Littleton, not having done that work for some time. But 18 months seemed pretty much the average. There were a few that do it shorter. I know Jennifer's talked about some communities that have been in the 4 to 6 month range. And so it is all over the board, but I don't know if you have anything to add from the national landscape.
No,
Carrie.
about the same. It's all over the place. And on the consultant side, when we're scoping a project, that's our first question. What's driving the timeline? And sometimes it's an election, sometimes it's heading toward a bond issue. There's just certain targets on the calendar. But I think this was a good sweet spot as far as moving it along, have a productive discussion after the work of last year, but not, sometimes these processes can start to stretch when the world is moving so fast. So this was expedited, but not too bad.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this point.
Jason?
Thanks for the overview of all the public outreach. And one of the things you had mentioned was that we had a public comment period on the final draft of the plan, although previous iterations were available for the study sessions that both Planning Commission and City Council had. Could you talk a little bit about how we processed that public input and whether any changes were made as a result of the public input in the version that came to us last week.
Yes. I think that the study session, we also mentioned how quickly the turnaround was, trying to keep that public comment period open as long as we could, but then also stay on our timeline of being in front of you this evening. So of those public comments, I think, I don't know if there was an actual split. There were a lot of people that commented on both the comprehensive plan, transportation master plan. So there were a lot of very rich and thoughtful comments to consider. And what we did note in the comprehensive plan is that changes that were made, both from a combination of input from your discussions at joint leadership, as well as those public comments were noted in highlighted yellow. So when you go through the plan, I didn't actually tally them up, but it is some pretty significant changes. I think a lot of consistency was added in terms of how those policy statements read, what the goals look like, even down to the action steps. And so I think that was a pretty constructive exercise from our standpoint. It was a very similar process last year with the vision document. We had an opportunity for the community to check our work, and that process yielded some yellow highlighted changes. And if you were to look back at that document, I think much like this year, it's a pretty different document from the start of public comment to what's before you this evening.
Thank you.
Bruce?
Not a question so much as a comment. You've collectively been very diligent, in my opinion, in terms of keeping this at the appropriate aspirational level for the plan, notwithstanding the oftentimes overpowering gravitational pull of getting into the weeds. And you can chat a little bit about that if you like, but I think my sense is that, we all, council does too, we all like to get into the weeds and get into the nitty gritty and the details and so forth and so on. But this struck me as there's a lot of content, but it's also at the appropriate level for what we're trying to accomplish here. And then the heavy lifting is down the road, as you've said, extensively throughout the process when we get into the implementation and the next steps. So if you care to...
Well, and I think that one of the things, and Jennifer would probably add to this too, one of the biggest challenges is not having sort of that policy direction. And so I think that was the greatest contributor to kind of keeping the document at that appropriate level, is really having that policy level conversation. In part, it starts to feel a little bit like a philosophical bent, but it is such valuable and important input in terms of giving direction to staff, and also being very, very clear with anyone that wants to consider Littleton for a business, consider Littleton for a potential development even. Just that level of consistency, because policy communicates something different than just a series of goals and actions.
Thank you.
So we've been calling this a living document. Can you please explain how that's going to work and the pros and cons of doing that?
So a lot of the conversation, I think, for us internally and then also at joint leadership has been the importance of having a framework. Our city manager often refers to this as a mobile, the idea that there'll be different levels of detail that can be added as we go. And so that plays a major role in that idea of a living document. I think there is a very clearly outlined process in terms of how the plan would be amended, but that constant review and analysis, as we find things that are not working, that's a conversation to bring to this body, but also for us to have internally as well. And so that idea of living and breathing is a real necessity for us, particularly because to Commissioner Stallman's point, so much of the detail is tackled in the work that we embark on in 2020 and 2021 with updating the land use code and zoning. And so as we find if we've created a contradiction, that there's really an opportunity to go back and address that and be very clear about what the intention is there. I think from the video, there was a short clip from Darren Atterbury, the manager of Fort Collins, and I think one of the most powerful things he said is, that you have to be intentional. And so that's what that policy direction really provides, and how this framework then hopefully adds to an opportunity for us to continue to evolve the conversation. I hope for everyone in the community, they understand that this framework is the start of a conversation. The conversation doesn't end with this plan being adopted or even being considered. This is the start of a conversation that will be a very, very rich and dynamic conversation moving into next year.
I'd like to also ask Jennifer. So in this, it talks about having an annual review and also every 5 years. How do you see that playing out, and how do you see the 1 year and the 5 year, the different reportings coming across and what will be accomplished in those timeframes?
So really on the annual basis, as Kathleen said, it's a living document. So as you're using it as Planning Commission, and we're using it as staff and presenting to you, things will come up that we're like, okay, that's not what we meant, or this is being misinterpreted or being interpreted different ways. So those are the little things that we can address annually. I envision that as looking at more like every December. Staff over the course of the year will have a running list of, okay, these are things we probably want to bring up with Planning Commission to talk about, and how we want to change anything if needed. So that sort of level on an annual basis, where amending or updating the comprehensive plan on a 5-year basis, that's really kind of going through a very similar process to what we have done here in the last 18 months. So that 5-year update, I could see it taking anywhere from 9 to 18 months when we're updating it, and it'll be a lot more community, continuing those community conversations. Because I can tell you, in these first 5 years that are going to occur after this adoption, we're going to have a lot of community conversations getting into the weeds that you were talking about of zoning, because a lot of these policies we make them regulatory through zoning. So that's where our hard conversations are going to be this coming year.
So do you see, as the Planning Commission, we'd be coming forward with our ideas also as we're progressing through this, and perhaps community members, if they see things coming to community development, to say, hey, let's look at this?
Yearly, yeah. But it just won't have the robust community engagement outreach on an annual basis, but that will be on that every 5-year basis.
Thank you.
About 19 months ago, we had a council planning commission breakfast, and I was complaining to our previous community development director that we were not that busy as a planning commission, and what's going to happen here. She gave me this sly grin and said, wait a half hour, and it was revealed then that we were going to be working on the new comprehensive plan, and for the first time working on a transportation master plan. The timetable was aggressive. It took my breath away. Typically in Littleton, whatever timeline I'm given, I double it and then double it again, and perhaps we're close to the actual time we take to work on this. In this case, here we are tonight. I don't have any questions. We've had 18 months of very intense input, lots of meetings, study sessions, meetings with council, numerous meetings with our fine staff members and consultants. I buttonholed staff on the side, complaining about this and that, putting together my typical 3 or 4 page tirades, pontifications about what needs to be done. And and admiring the public input that's happened along the way. So I think we've hashed out most of our issues in that time period, so I really don't have any questions to ask. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, we'll move on to public comment. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. We expect the discourse to be civil. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow card will be held up. When your 3 minutes are up, you'll be shown the red card. Again, 3 minutes to speak. There'll be no pooling of time. Everyone will have 3 minutes to speak. We have a sign-up sheet. If you haven't signed up and you wish to address the Planning Commission, we'll ask at the end if there's anybody else that wishes to speak. First up is Louise Ritchie.
Good evening. My name is Louise Ritchie, and I manage community engagement for Arapahoe Library District. I'm also on the Bemis Library Board and was a member of the Community Coordinating Committee for Envision Littleton. I wanted to let you all know what a great experience that committee was for me. It was inclusive, informative, and interactive. I truly felt a part of the process in helping make Envision Littleton more accessible and understandable to the community at large. And I'm proud to be part of a city that has invested in future planning. I plan to live here a long time, and I want to know that we as a city are being proactive, not reactive, in planning for the future. And I appreciate the opportunity that Envision Littleton has given me to be part of co-creating the future of our city. It was a fantastic experience led by a great team. I'm excited about the future of Littleton. And I hope that the Planning Commission will recommend the adoption of the comprehensive and transportation plans to the City Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up is Dan, and I think it's Dan. I'm not going to be able to read your last name. Once again, yes, Littleton needs to work on their penmanship, as I always say.
Dan Radulovich, I live at 7,000 South Gallup Street. And before I get started, I'd like to thank the commission, the council, city staff, consultants, anyone involved in this process for putting the amount of work in that they have. You don't come up with two gigantic documents like this without a lot of work ahead of yourselves. First off, I'd like to start with on page 62, the policy under economy and tax base number 8. Thank you for changing that. I suggested basically it could be something that was pretty dangerous in that it would, anytime there would be something that hinders development, you would almost be compelled to do it on the previous wording of monitor and adjust, and it was changed to evaluate and consider. So whoever caught that, thank you for doing that. I thought that was probably one of the more dangerous things in the document. That was just my opinion. One of the other sections as a whole that I have some observations and suggestions about is the housing and neighborhoods section. There is a goal in here. The goal number 4 is neighborhoods that maintain their character and are carefully managed when headed toward transition. Now, in support of these goals, there are 3 policies that I could pick out, 3, 6, and 7, and some of those are kind of loose as to whether they actually contribute to that as well. There's one action I can figure out in number 9 that has to do with code compliance. There is, in regulation and standards, there's an action, number 11, that's character-based zoning, evaluate the best practices for accessory dwellings and short-term rentals. You knew I wouldn't get out of here without saying short-term rentals, but anyway. Number 12, actually, that's not one. Number 14 was to maintain ongoing outreach and communication to the HOAs or areas that don't have HOAs. And that's really about it as far as what was put into neighborhoods. A lot of this is about affordable housing, which I know was a bit of a critique no matter what. It seemed like from whatever area you were coming at. And one of the things that I would like to suggest is to, I don't know, it's probably not going to make it in tonight, I understand that, but some sort of revision of zoning, how many zoning changes are happening in a particular neighborhood in, say, a year, 6 months, what have you. And just to review how many of those changes are happening, who's requesting them, what's going on with them, and just to see how that neighborhood is changing, whether it's the people that own the homes that are wanting to maybe pack a bit more density on, whether it's developers coming in. I think it would just be a good idea to just review that so that we make sure that the neighborhoods themselves are driving this and not a lot of developers coming in and buying up land that are the ones who are trying to develop the neighborhood character. With that, my comments are about up. So thank you for your time and your service.
Thank you. Next up is Mike Madrid.
Good evening. My name is Mike Madrid, and good evening to the Planning Commission and to staff. I'm a certified urban planner working in the Denver metropolitan area. I'm a citizen of Littleton, and I also serve on the board of South Metro Housing Options, Littleton's housing authority. On behalf of South Metro Housing Options, I'd like to offer the following affirmative comments about Envision Littleton. Envision Littleton does a good job of identifying many of the most significant issues related to housing needs of Littleton, such as lack of affordable housing and challenges related to aging in place, homelessness, aging housing stock, and the potential for loss or lack of diversity due to unattainable housing choices in Littleton. It recognizes these housing-related issues, which is important because they impact the entire community. SMHO also appreciates that the comprehensive plan discusses the need for a variety of housing options for different groups of people, like seniors and families, but also a variety of income levels as well. It points to the importance of a diverse housing stock, which is also vital for the community, and that's not just going over affordable rental units, but also for affordable home ownership. Finally, SMHO recognizes that the comprehensive plan references the Littleton Housing Study conducted by BBC Consulting. The housing study was a thorough document that provided a considerable amount of valuable information and is beneficial to use as a guide going forward as it relates to the housing needs of our city. The comprehensive plan also does a great job of tying different external challenges together, as most challenges to housing do not exist on their own. Issues affecting transportation, housing, education, and healthcare are all connected. Housing located near transportation can be very valuable and provides opportunities to light rail or bus access should residents not own a car. Integrating transportation and housing can also improve access to healthy food options. Thank you for the opportunity to be involved with the development of Envision Littleton. That's to staff, our consultants, the Planning Commission, as well as City Council. South Metro Housing Options looks forward to continuing its work with the City of Littleton to address our community housing needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Linda Newpinky? Did I finally pronounce your name correctly?
Good enough. My name is Linda Knupinky, and I live in the 4th District in an access preservation area, and also I also live in a proposed corridor mixed-use area. So it's kind of an interesting mix there. It's not a touch screen. I just wanted to let you know, on page 34 in the comprehensive plan, the corridor mixed-use primary land use types, it does not have single-family housing in it. And the Ensor South, Ensor North, Norgren, and Columbine Square are some of the biggest properties to develop in this area. And for this area, 3 of the 4 properties at one time proposed single-family houses. So is this reasonable? And do we want to affirm high-density apartments through activity corridors in Littleton? And the next subject I have is open space. The value of open space in Littleton is everywhere in the comprehensive plan. And you can see to the right of the teal, there's goals and policies and actions in the plan for open space. And then this is the memo that was submitted for the edits for the TMP plan. And it says the changes are also made to the Santa Fe Critical Corridor summary on page 130, and here it is on page 130. There's no changes. You don't have that information, so you don't know what's proposed. And I would actually propose moving the access preservation area up to north of Lee Gulch. And this is page 63 and 60. It's also showing the access preservation area and the potential road through South Platte Park. Here is another page 26 that page 140, table 26, that has 2 potential new South Platte River Parkway extensions. So, I mean, this road is real. And then here's 3 more on page 167, and here's something on page 166 referencing the South Platte River Parkway. So if you don't want to build a road through South Platte Park, say what you want to do in the TMP. Don't make us guess or follow imprecise language allowing for a road through the park. And this, by including a road, you're single-handedly eliminating tens of millions of dollars spent in the last 30 years to make this park what it is today. Many partners spent money on the park, such as Arapahoe County, South Platte Working Group, GOCO, Trust for Public Lands, South Suburban Parks and Recreation, the City of Littleton's, and others who diligently work to support open space in and around Mary Carter Greenway. The references in the plan are clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Tammy Whitney.
Good evening. I'm Tammy Whitney. I was a community member of the Community Coordinating Committee. How do you grow, maintain your identity and charm, manage forces from the outside which are dictating change, and preserve the unique qualities which have been part of your history? These are the issues addressed by the Community Coordinating Committee, which engaged monthly with the project management and technical teams hired by the city to look at the many issues facing Littleton. The project defined the issues needed to be addressed by the city's comprehensive plan. Do you want that down lower? Sorry. And, wow. And a new transportation master plan so that Littleton can be proactive when facing the challenges of growth from the west, Jeffco, the south, Douglas County, and our main thoroughfare, Santa Fe, which is CDOT. This work defined and outlined objectives to ensure our voice is heard, and we have a plan that will help us move forward, better able to protect our interests as a city. I was impressed with the hands-on exercises we did to understand the complexity of the traffic issues. If there is any way we can extend that to the citizens, that would be beneficial. But finally, as I shared this information with neighbors, I heard many great ideas. There are many people who want to and will continue to be engaged with this great city. I see this plan as a beginning and a way to move ahead, caring for this place we love. I urge for you to accept the plan.
Thank you. Pam Chadbourne.
My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here. And I'm going to take 15 more seconds. This is an illustration, because I was setting up the view graph, of downtown. And I live in downtown, and basically from Santa Fe, Prince to ACC, it's 3 types of urban and a change to corridor mixed use. The example shows 5% open space and 80% structures, and my fear is that a developer or a good land use lawyer can say, you've quantified the amount of open space and structure that you're going to have in your zoning, and if you try to zone anything other than this anywhere in the downtown area, I'm going to sue you because you've already given me what your intentions are for all of downtown Littleton. I am going to tell you, I wasn't part of the CCC. I live downtown, and none of us were consulted about this change to urban. It is not the character now. It is not the inevitable character. Only a few parts of it have CA. This is not the right thing to do. It is not justified by the claimed outreach. There was no bottoms-up motion for this, or very little. Most people don't want this change of character, and definitely in the city at large, they don't. Quaint and charm come from limited lot sizes with open space and setbacks, and this violates that totally. In the whole downtown, it would change the character totally. This is unjustified by the process. Now, I'm going to want to say a couple of other things. The CCC were 19 people selected by the mayor, one person. They are not representative. I don't think there was a single tenant or renter of low income from the Northeast Corridor. And the Northeast Corridor has major changes to it, which again are totally unjustified by the input process. What I'm asking you to do is to mark the future land use and the pages of uses in work so that it enforces the fact to land developer lawyers that this is not final, that 5% green space and 80% structure downtown, and that these uses have not been bought off by the citizens. They were not what we asked for, that it does not reflect our desire. It is not the desire of the community. Mark it in work, please, so that we keep this away from a possible harm, a great harm, a disaster for the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Joseph Trujillo.
Good evening, Council. My name is Joseph Trujillo. I live at 5574 South Huron Street. I would like you to know that I was honored to be on the council in 1980 when the first comprehensive plan was put in effect. In 1980, the railroad plan to depress the railroad was put under. The citizens voted for it. It was put to the ballot with segments, and it went through. So Littleton finally was becoming a city that was not divided for so many years. Having lived here, our family, since 1924, you always had to deal with the railroads. So this is something that a lot of new people that moved into the city in 59 with Lockheed Martin and all of the other businesses, we had a lot of good councils that their goal in comprehensive plan was the desires of the neighborhood. And that was one of the greatest ones we had. It was stifling to have to wait 2 or 3 times for railroad trains loaded with coal going back and forth through town. But when we think about everything that's going on, I probably was taken back because this plan that you have now, in 1972 or 73, we started on the comprehensive plan that we passed. So it wasn't an overnight deal. We had the schools involved. Hundreds of people showed up at each meeting, and this went on and on and on. So, you know, we have had some wonderful people, councils that have really dealt with this, and you have to be careful that you don't sell your city down the river with the decisions that you make. And I just want to say I compliment you for being on the commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Carol Brezak.
I'm Carol Brezak. I live in the 4th District. I don't want to spend too much time with the compliments because I want to talk about issues. But this was definitely needed. It's a good start. I see it as a start. It's still a draft. I feel somewhat cheated as a member of a board. We had a representative to the committee, never had one discussion at our board meeting. I don't even know if our representative ever attended a meeting. I understand that the zoning code is going to be updated based on the guidance from this document. And I have concern, particularly about what seems to me to be the most important matter in Littleton, and that's growth. And if we're going to be updating the zoning code and using this as a guide for growth, there's nothing in here that states what the community desires in the way of growth. So I see that as a big missing element. I live in somewhat rural area with large lots. It's been designated suburban residential. And by the way, I love Kendig and Keast and how they approach community character. I have no problem with that at all. But one of the things that I have had an issue with from the very beginning was the element of cluster development being able to, being allowed in my suburban residential area. And the two words cluster development have been removed from the plan, but it's been replaced by multiple words with the intent being the same. I can see where the pie charts would be the same, but to take this and call it suburban residential, and use the same definition for that bothers me. I think there needs to be two different distinctions for suburban residential cluster development and suburban residential. My concern is what happens if somebody wants to purchase a home in my neighborhood and scrape it and come in and develop it with cluster homes. And I don't see any protection in the document that would keep that from happening. And I live in an older neighborhood. We have people passing away more often than I would like to. It happens. So I'm very concerned about my own neighborhood. We have a rural setting. I'd like to keep it that way. And I thought the whole idea of this was to inventory so we could protect what we have. And I don't see the protection. I see a big change that might come to my neighborhood. So I would like to hear some discussion about that. And I'd also like to hear about the transition between this, the passage of this, and the zoning code change. What rules in what way? Thank you.
Thank you. That ends the list of people who signed up. Is there anyone else wish to speak? We have several hands up. Okay. State your name, address for the record.
Upside down. Sit down.
Sorry. Good evening, Mark. I'm sorry, Chairman Rudnicki and the Planning Commission. This passage of the comprehensive plan and the transportation master plan is rather rushed, and I understand the desire to get it done. Bruce and I were on a council that very much tried to get a comprehensive plan approved before the election happened and a new council got on. I understand the desire. The problem with the plan isn't that you're going in the wrong direction. I'm actually incredibly impressed with what's happened so far. The problem with the plan is it needs more time to get some more stuff in. And one example of that is you've got two documents that are over 150 pages each, the comprehensive plan and the transportation master plan, and you've got 1 3-minute comment period. And you can't possibly address both documents in that. So what I want to talk about is a transportation master plan. Because it appears that there's a road that goes from Aspen Grove up to Hudson Gardens through South Platte Park that's called out in the transportation plan. I say approved because there's other people, for instance, former city manager Jim Woods thinks that that's in there. When I tried to talked to Linda Newfinke about whether the road was in there or not, I was looking at the document that's posted in the packet for you guys. She was going to the website, and this is a screenshot of your website as of tonight that has the Transportation Master Plan in 2 parts. And so it was impossible for us to try and reconcile what we were looking at because the pages don't line up. Now, I don't know if that's a formatting issue or anything else like that, but you're getting ready to approve a transportation master plan that theoretically calls out a road to go through the crown jewel of the open space that Littleton has. And that open space is so valued by Littleton, that's probably the reason why the Walmart was turned down, is because where it was located. So the fact that we don't even know what the road is, and it's not just any road, if you look at the priority of projects, it ties for number 2 on the point system as the most important projects to do. So if it's not going to happen, then how did it get that way in the point system? If it is going to happen, then that's going to have a serious impact on what happens to South Platte Park. But the part of the discussion that's missing in the next 10 seconds is the fact that what the transportation plan shows us is the incredible impact that will happen to Littleton in trying to mitigate the traffic that currently exists in Littleton. And we've had no discussion about the relationship between people and density, which causes the traffic, and what the costs are to Littleton's quality of life. I mean, just putting in 2 grade separations at Bowles and Mineral Avenue is going to have a significant impact on the character and the quality of life in Littleton. And the reason why you have a transportation master plan and a comprehensive plan and you do it at the same time is hopefully because you can talk about the relationship between the two, and there's none of that discussion that's taken place. So I'm impressed with what's happened with the transportation plan. I'm grateful that Jennifer came to our neighborhood twice to talk to us. But the fact that you only had the plan finalized for comments a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, that you have a planning commission meeting now with 3 minutes of comments for 2 documents that are over 150 pages long, and that the comprehensive plan is going to be used to guide the decisions on what changes to make to the zoning, and so it's important to get that. And I don't even have time to start talking about the comprehensive plan, so thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks. Sorry, I didn't see the red card.
We'll dock you 30 seconds there.
Next time.
Next time, yes. Paul.
Good evening. My name is Paul Bingham, District 3. I think this plan is well done. The process was well done. I appreciate very much Jennifer and these folks, Gary and Meredith, being willing, very open to discuss the whole thing, including out in neighborhoods and other areas than just right here. I was honored to be in the first group to be interviewed by them, along with Carol Breezak and Jack Randall, who is now deceased, unfortunately. And I've made comments during those meetings, and I appreciate the opportunity. The only problem I've got with this is I agree with Pam Chadbourne about the 5% thing on the downtown area. I think that's risky to put in the plan for the reasons she said, and also agree with her on putting in work on the northeast area. Other than that, I think it's a job well done, and I thank the folks that have done it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We had a gentleman here.
Well, good evening to the Planning Commission and staff and consultants. My name is Steve Mueller. I live in District 4. I've got 2 points that I want to discuss, but let me give you a little background on me just for a second. I worked on the city staff from 1983 to 1991, 8 years. I have 13 years in local government experience. So I also have an MPA from University of Colorado, Denver, so I'm pretty familiar with the processes that you all are dealing with. I wanted to talk about two things that are dear to my heart. The first is open space, and the 5% limit that I'm seeing there is a big concern. I actually was first chair of Arapahoe County's Open Space and Trails Advisory Group, and we started the whole plan for open space and trails that we all enjoy now. I set up all the processes that are at work for dividing not just based on population, but also grants, a grant program, widely accepted by the citizens. Last time we sunset it every 10 years, it was 70% accepted the last time. So last time I went to a vote. So I want to protect our open space and trails. So when I see a roadway going along South Platte Park, I'm very, very concerned about that. I was on city staff when we had to deal with the construction of the railroad depression, and I lived here before the railroad depression. It was horrendous. I was on city staff when we had to go and get an act of Congress to build a road across South Platte Park. That's Mineral Avenue that we all now enjoy. I live at the top of Jackass Hill. I built the first road for the city underneath the bridges for Mineral Avenue extension going into Santa Fe. Jackass Hill, when I moved there, was a dirt road going across the railroad track. So I've been here 37 years, okay? So protect our open space. As a retired federal employee now, I'd say there's some big concerns with 4F issues that go along with building roads across open space. The second thing I want to talk about is in 1983, when I worked on the city staff, we had 30,000 people in Littleton. The most recent demographic I've seen is somewhere around 45,000 people now in 2019. That's an increase of 50%. Okay, in this document, what I'm seeing is cluster homes, like Carol said, and it really concerns me, up to 6,500 new dwelling units. That's probably more than 50% growth. Again, no wonder we have a traffic problem. We need time to address these issues, for more people to be involved in this. So my final plea to you all is let's not rush this through for some politics here at the second. This is an important, incredibly important process, incredibly important document to the whole process and the future of Littleton. I encourage you to postpone the consideration of this document until we have more time to study it and read it. Those two big issues should drive our decision tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishes to speak? Seeing no hands raised, we'll close the public comment portion of our hearing. Staff, do you have any last comments? And commissioners, do you have any last questions of staff? Start with you guys.
No additional comments.
Okay. None. Questions of staff?
Yeah, the comment about access preservation, if I recall correctly from our last joint session meeting, that was really trying to indicate, like telling CDOT, hey, we still want to be able to have access to this area. Was that, and not necessarily roads going through open space?
Yeah, and we, in the first draft, illustrated that with a fuzzy pink line. We talked about that being kind of like a fuzzy pink caterpillar, which was not a great way to describe what we were working towards. I mean, as you look at work that CDOT's done in similar corridors across the state, often the conversation is about managing, controlling access, and we want to make sure that there is that preservation of access. We know that there are people that are living there, businesses that are operating there, and it's critically important that we communicate to CDOT how that significant that access is. And so that was really, trying to better illustrate that and define that as an access preservation area.
And then finally, the intent of the pie charts, and I don't know that I recall saying that it was going to be 5% open space, but can you sort of maybe elaborate on the intent of the pie charts and how that is going to maybe tie into zoning eventually, where we may talk about how much building can be on a parcel, or can you give us some insight on that?
Absolutely. The pie charts are meant to be illustrative. The word example is above them. And the reason they don't have numbers on them, and you can guesstimate what those pie slices may be in terms of percentages, but it doesn't mean anything right now because we've talked about the zoning process and the planning process are going to be interactive to the point that when you do that first annual update, or whether it's 18 months from now at the end of the zoning process, I fully expect that this plan will be amended based on the conversations that happen during that zoning process. One thing we talked about at joint workshop last week or joint study session was, and I understand it happens everywhere, people want to have a zoning conversation right now. And that's not the way these are typically done. You do a plan first, you do zoning second. I'll just say as a personal aside, the longer I do this, I think you should do them at the same time. It's just a crazy process to do one and then the other, or they interact so much. But not being able to do that, the pies are illustrative to give a general sense of what's suburban relative to what's urban, relative to what's auto-oriented. So the more important thing at this point is to look at the pies next to each other, not to look at or to try and surmise certain percentages because they're not there. It's just an example. So there's more discussion to come. If I could take the opportunity, Chairman, just to, because I know you asked staff if they had further comments, because I'd like to connect some dots. I agree with one of the comments, Carol's comment, that growth is the number one issue facing this community, and whether that's going to be new people, new development, whether it's going to be internal growth. We've talked about potential increase in household sizes. That's one way you can grow internally, even if another housing unit wasn't added. And the idea of protecting versus change. That's
People
what
in the
struck
audience
me.
can't hear you. Can you speak
Oh,
into the
absolutely.
mic?
One thing that struck me.
Thank you.
Yes. One thing that struck me just in these last few months of discussion of the drafts and in the comments that came in from the 30-day comment period is that divide. It's there. We've known it from the beginning, protect versus change. And we have people saying, why is the map all yellow? We want to see change. And we have other people saying, we don't want to see any change. That's the tension that's been here the whole time. So that's one reason that those pies, to go back to the question, are illustrative and to be determined through the zoning discussion, because it's going to take that level of discussion to find where that middle ground is between protect and change. One final point, because I know there's been a lot of discussion about this idea of cluster development. And because this is meant to set up the zoning conversation, I just want to emphasize again, it's rearranging the same number of units on the landscape. It's not increasing the number of housing units. And so as you go to smaller lots or cluster those units, there's more open space. That's what maintains or even enhances the character. Now, when you have these conversations with Brett gets to pick up this conversation. He will talk about we have done in codes that you can incentivize. We'll give you another unit. We're not going to give you 5 more units or 10 more units on a site, but we might give you 1 more just to get that additional yield from your development. But if you add that 1 more unit, we're going to take even more open space. So it's rearranging density on the landscape. It's not increasing density in terms of units per acre. So again, like we said the other night, at the risk of getting into the weeds, I just wanted to make that point as well for the zoning discussion to come. Thank you.
Other questions? None?
No, I've got it.
Oh, okay.
Couple.
I'll call out names if you would like.
No, that's okay. Oh, let me see here.
talk a little bit, I think the comprehensive plan is something we have experience with, but in as much as the transportation master plan is something, frankly, nobody who's been involved has any experience with in our community. Talk a little bit about the integration of the comp plan and the transportation master plan and how you see those evolving in a coordinated fashion over some period of time.
And talk a little bit about from the standpoint of working together with and then I do have something to add, so.
At the end of the day, it's mainly about street design and potential redesign. There's terms like complete streets and road diets that are out there, ways that you use the available right-of-way that you have between lanes for vehicle traffic versus wider sidewalks potentially, bike lanes, all those pieces, transit. Excuse me, I know I'm not as close to the mic as I could be. So the main interaction is that street cross-section and design interacting with those character types. So if you're aiming for an area that is meant to be more suburban or estate, theoretically that's not the area for 6-lane roadways. But if you're in an area that is more auto-oriented, that's the way it's developed. Broadway is one of the more obvious ones in Littleton. It's North Broadway especially, some of the shopping areas that are mostly about parking and a fair amount of pavement on sites. That dictates a different type of roadway design that may not prioritize the pedestrian as much. But then we have the game changer of if bus rapid transit happens on Broadway in that stretch, that could change the equation, and you're still needing to deal with a fair amount of vehicular traffic, but how do you bring in the pedestrian, the bike, and accommodate transit within that available right-of-way? So it's mainly the character roadway design connection between the two. Beyond that, I think what the challenge that the transportation plan has is what's happening around you and south of you and pass-through traffic. So the conference plan certainly has to deal with that as well, but that's where you do control things like density and the type of development through your zoning. Transportation, you're trying to get ahead of some of those things, but at some point, you're always reacting to what's happening around you that you don't control.
So would it be, well, go ahead, Kathleen.
No, the couple of things that I would add that touched on some of them. From the project management design standpoint, we thought it was really important to have as much of a holistic conversation with the community as possible. So, all of those phases were really designed to have both a land use and transportation component to them. So I think that was really important to touch on and further illustrate on Gary's point about the street types. So defining those in a way that actually take into account the context of Littleton was an important step. It's been an ongoing struggle for our staff to try and fit the roads that we have here in the community into those standard sort of template definitions that exist in the transportation world. And so being able to provide that context is a much better approach for us to sort of understand then how you map that out across the community. I think that, obviously has implications on the land use side, but it also has direct correlation to how those roads then are designed moving forward, the types of amenities that are on them. I think the other important piece was to get away from having a conversation road by road, but really talking more about a complete network. So I think that starts to talk about the movement of people, which is going to be an important component to those land use decisions as well.
And if we're, for the sake of an argument, considering plan updates every few years, 3 to 5 years, maybe less, would you envision the transportation master plan having a similar time horizon for updating, or is it a bit more static given the nature of its content?
I expect that, so the process that we're looking at now is that they would go through that update together. It's becoming more and more a best practice in terms of how cities are having that conversation. Sometimes it's very difficult at the community engagement level to talk about land use and not talk about transportation. For a lot of people, that is directly how they relate to what's happening on the ground in their city. And so those conversations are really complementary, and more that is becoming a best practice. I think it does become easier with an update. We looked at the Envision Longmont, for example, their model. It was an update of both of their plans. It was a very successful process for them, but of course, first ever transportation master plan. I think it had more benefit than it did, or it had more benefit to approach it this way for us with this update and combine the two. And I think that's going to remain to be true every 5 years when we look to update.
Okay.
Bruce, if I may, just with the benefit of a chance to think a little bit more, I think the other thing that you'll see between the transportation plan, the comprehensive plan, and it goes back to the housing authority comments, is connecting the dots between not just moving people and goods, but employment, getting to leisure activities, getting to parks, just all those pieces of life. I think that comes through on both sides, the comp plan and the transportation plan. And on the comprehensive plan side, I just ask everybody to keep in mind the residential use that generates the most trips is the single-family detached home. I always try to remind people that, because we talk about density means traffic, single-family detached homes generate the most trips.
Okay, thank you. You want to?
You have
I
another
have
one?
one more, just
One more, sure.
if I may.
You may.
Okay. Just, you had mentioned, and there's something I want to touch on that we've had conversation about, but it hasn't really come up too much in the meetings, is the issue of employment. And it might, as an addendum to the plan somewhere, make sense to evaluate and establish some sort of a job creation goal that we kind of assume, or have always assumed with respect to land use decision-making, that when we render a decision on a request to make a change to a land use, that there's a positive economic impact. And I think maybe Doug mentioned something to this effect, that perhaps having a goal for job creation and the types of jobs that maybe we think would be complementary, both from, people living in the community and living close to their work and not increasing traffic and supporting local businesses and so forth, might be essentially closing the loop on some of these issues that could be called out in here. I go back to a number of years ago when I don't know what the process was at the time, but today we've got a lot of healthcare facilities all the way from Littleton Hospital Complex with the office buildings, and there's various memory care facilities and so forth and so on. And it strikes me that those are jobs that people can have in the city and not have to commute long distances to perform, that they're good, well-paying jobs, so forth and so on, all those attributes. But it might be nice as a part of this whole process to have that kind of a dimension included in our strategic thinking. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, two parts to that. I think it's been part of our conversations, and you may have been following that our economic development team here at the city, their last strategic plan was created in 2013. So they'd very much like to update that. So they're beginning that work with creating an interactive model to be able to understand the impact, the economic impact of specific projects. So that becomes the first piece in that. And then they'll look in 2020 to update their strategic plan. So I think your feedback is incredibly helpful in the types of things that plan would speak to. And again, much as I mentioned earlier, the idea that this comprehensive plan becomes a framework, or that idea of a mobile, that is a piece that we are very much looking to add with the work at the end of the year on the model, and then redeveloping that strategic plan in 2020.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Gentle reminder, we do have lots of time for summations, so let's keep our questions direct to staff. Robin?
So clarifying, basing on what Craig was saying, the access preservation is not about a road going through South Platte Park and taking away from open space.
Correct.
Okay. Another question that came up is the pie chart for the urban area and downtown. Compared to that pie chart there versus what we have today, are there substantial differences? So the pie chart that's for the urban, the downtown area, showing our green space, our gray and our brown. What we have today, what's allowed today in our zoning, is there a lot of difference between the pie chart and the new comp plan versus what we are allowing right now in the urban downtown area?
In terms of zoning, I can't speak to that as much, not knowing all the nuances of what's happened over the years, but the pie charts for the different urban categories are the same because they're just examples. But as was mentioned for the category, which is on page 36, urban downtown transition, as the description talks about, there's a variety of uses and character in that area. It's a spectrum, and so there are parts of that, especially as you get closer to Littleton Boulevard and closer to downtown, closer to the tracks, goes more toward the urban end of the spectrum. But there are places that absolutely have yards and green space, so it's a mix. And the zoning discussion will talk about where do we go from here? And where do we actually draw lines in terms of zoning districts that have different numbers associated with them. For now, this is a broader brush comprehensive plan level of discussion of relative to a few miles south of there. This is more the urban part of the spectrum than suburban. But yeah, there's a lot of variety in that ring area around the core downtown.
So the pie chart that we are seeing for the area right now in the new comprehensive plan is not eliminating all that variety we see today?
No.
Okay.
No.
And last one might be more applicable to Jennifer about the transition between now and our new zoning. How do you see that coming forth?
That's a great question.
It wasn't mine, it was somebody else's.
Mine too.
So obviously the zoning lift is huge, and for us to get that underway as quickly as possible is important. But really what we're doing over the next 90 days is really trying to figure out how that zoning is going to roll out, what the weighing with the community, what that is going to look like, weighing if there's it geographically that we need to conquer, how zoning is going to be, or if it's zone district by zone district. So that is something that we have already started the discussion on how we do that. There are other mechanisms that can be used when you talk about how do we deal with the development that's already in process or the development that's coming. And that really is up to Planning Commission and City Council, kind of what tools you might want to put into place.
Thanks. No more questions.
Jason, you have anything else to add?
No.
Okay. Well, my questions were answered about the South Platte Parkway, and Then Bruce, is your excellent question about asking, does the Transportation Master Plan follow the same review after the zoning and the zoning code and the zoning map review has been completed? So with that,
I had one more question.
Oh, sorry about that.
Sorry. So the implementation section talks about plan revisions and it kind of outlines timeframes. The public is still has an opportunity to participate in those revisions and that discussion. Is that
Correct.
correct? Okay. That's what I just wanted to share.
And just following up on some other questions and some concerns that came up in the comments. One was the connection between the transportation and land use components of the plan. And obviously, they were fundamental to the process of developing the plan. But in the product, I guess I failed to see a strong linkage between the two, and maybe that evolves over time with the updates and so on. I'm wondering if there's anything that I'm missing. I guess the question would be, how did the process of developing the land use impact transportation and vice versa?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things, and one of Gary's earlier comments becomes part of that. You know, the transportation master plan in many ways takes into account a lot of things that are happening around us in a way that, you know, our comprehensive plan really decides on our destiny and really speaks to our boundaries. So I think that those are two important conversations when you think about where some of the transportation investments and some of the future study that's happening with organizations like CDOT, with RTD, with other counties and cities and neighbors. You know, when you think about something like the planning and environmental linkages study that kicks off this year. So much of that conversation, I think they are very complementary. I think the Transportation Master Plan does feel like a more technical document than the comprehensive plan. And I think that that's sort of a necessary piece to being able to have that conversation with other regional entities like the Denver Regional Council of Governments and CDOT and RTD. So I think it'll be a very important piece to communicating clearly what our desires are as a community. But the comprehensive plan does really feel like, you know, how we control our own destiny in many ways. I think the Transportation Master Plan really speaks to the type of partner that we want to be, keeping first and foremost the needs of our community out in front. So I don't know if that helps.
I think I see them both as frameworks that are starting to mesh, but not completely there yet. But again, as part of the process, they're fundamental to talk about them at the same time.
Yeah.
I would second that thought, that it's the start of an evolving discussion with DRCOG, because when we do comprehensive plan work in metropolitan areas, those regional councils have regional transportation models that have been built over decades with assumptions and thinking of what the land use pattern is in different parts of the region. And sometimes communities don't have a lot of say in that until they have their say, literally. So you now have a document and a process to be in a stronger position to have that conversation of why some of those land use assumptions possibly should change. So that's the part that will be continuing.
Okay. And our timing is really great. That process of the 2050 Metro Vision Plan has just begun.
Okay. And my other question was about the guidance that the future land use plan provides for the future zoning process, which will follow. And there's a lot of detail in that land use and character map. And as we go through it, we look at cases and so on. We say, well, you know, is that the right future land use character? I know a lot of it's based on what is there now. How much flexibility, I guess, is there in applying that land use and character to the zoning? It's not set in stone at this point, correct?
Correct. And tying back to the questions about transition and process, I guarantee you, well, I can tell you, the first thing that the other part of our team will be doing is evaluating in painful detail the current zoning and where it doesn't give you a way to accomplish some things that are in this plan, or where, no, it's there. You have the pieces already, and where there's some things in between. The other part, you're going to see a lot of education examples. I guarantee you, Brett will be showing you photos in your community of places that have the same zoning and the outcome looks totally different. And it's because the character piece was missing. The design aspect wasn't there. The uses may be the same and the setbacks are the same and things like that, but the outcome doesn't match. And that's what the character discussion is about. So critique of what you have, examples, education, then the decision points start coming. Where do we draw those boundaries? What standards do we set? And that's the feedback loop back to the map and potentially some of the content that's in this plan.
Okay, thank you.
Any last comments, questions? We'll entertain a motion and do our summations. Who wants to be motion person? Do we have to vote on it or just, no, I just
No,
say.
you can just
All right,
close the public
We are now
hearing.
closing the public hearing.
Thank you.
Right. I move to approve the resolution recommending adoption of the Envision Littleton Comprehensive Plan.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Dan, we'll start with you again.
Well, thank you. Thank you, and thank you to the public. I mean, I feel like this plan is pretty well vetted. As Kathleen outlined how many times we've met and how much we've had subject experts involved, city staff, council, planning commission, historic preservation board, and a number of outside agencies have had their finger in this, and plus the public. And so I think it's a great document. I feel like I'm just at the blocks right now, ready for a race, and I'm just waiting for the sign to go. So ready for this to get going, and really looking forward to actually having a really solid plan to help us make decisions and guide decisions. So I'll be supporting of it.
Great.
Okay, and I heard a number of comments from folks tonight that needs more time. And my gut feeling is I'd love to see more time. There's never long enough to hear input onto something as important as the future of our community. There's just not enough time to look at the complexities and so on. But then when I look back at the 18 months that we've been working on this, I feel that we have had adequate conversations. The plan's not perfect; it's not fully developed yet, but it meets the needs of the city, and I think it meets the desires of our community from what I've heard and seen. At the end, it's fairly simple. We're really identifying, as Peter Kageyama said, what we love about our city, and the plan, I think, captures that essence. It at a high level, it's flexible enough to allow us to update, amend, provide input, interpret. And it also represents, I think, an inclusive community process. So, and it's open to interpretation and change as we move on. So, I do support it. I hear the concerns and comments that were expressed here tonight and appreciate those and hope that we can address them.
Jason?
All right. Just wanted to express my appreciation for the staff and the consultant team and everyone in the community who participated in this process. I think our team did an amazing job of reaching out and being where people are with all the pop-up events and meetings in people's living rooms. Just that effort really shows in the final document. I'm looking forward to our conversations about the zoning. There's going to be some very interesting conversations, particularly about density in this community and how that interacts with the transportation system. And one thing that I do look forward to is continuing that conversation, accessory dwelling units, transit-oriented development.
Wait, what?
Yes. One thing, though, I do want to highlight in the transportation master plan is the thought that went into the projects. And the transportation master plan is not just a document that talks about our aspirations. It actually shows that if you do these projects, you will see these results. And in particular, figure 16 and figure 18 in the transportation master plan show that right now 15% of our community is within a 2-mile low-stress bike ride to the light rail stations. If we tick off everything on that list, that goes up to 76%. I think the plan says something like 4.3 times as many people will be served if we're able to accomplish that. So I really appreciated how the transportation master plan ties ideals to action, and I will be supporting the motion.
Yeah, I would echo what some of the other commissioners have mentioned about thanking staff and the consultant team and the folks that come out tonight but have been in, participatory throughout the entire process, that in various multiple forms that have been provided, multiple venues. I think it's Mark, in conversation when this process started, made reference to wanting the staff and the consultants in particular to not be the planned drivers, but to be the chauffeurs. And I think that's exactly what has happened here. And I also think that this is another phrase that you've used, and I want to give credit to you for calling this plan Littletonized. It's not an off-the-shelf plan that somebody just pulled out and said, well, let's just use this. This particular effort throughout the process, the emphasis has been acutely oriented towards making this a Littleton-specific document and not just a comprehensive plan that, would be generic to any community our size. So, well done in that regard. When we're done, I did want to maybe make one amendment to the motion, but I can wait.
Why don't you wait, we'll get our summations in and...
Deal.
Go ahead.
Yep, I'm done, thank you.
Or nor you, and move on, okay.
Obviously, a tremendous amount of hard work went into this. I did see a bit of a dichotomy of engagement, though. Working on the comp plan showed a grassroots-oriented, organic, flowing up, listening to the community. What does the community want? The comp plan doesn't have any template feel to it. Watching it change as suggestions came forward, a planning commission meeting and then seeing the document changing with what we've said, it was very dramatic, and to me it showed incredible engagement and what I would love to see in all of our plans. I was very appreciative of how the comp plan came forward. That was not my experience with the transportation master plan. Whereas the comp plan felt like an engaging conversation, a lot of times with the TMP, it felt more like a brick wall. I'll just sum it up in one experience to explain this. During a joint meeting with the City Council and Planning Commission, we separated out into 4 different tables. 2 were about the comp plan and 2 were about the transportation plan. listening to the conversation from the comp plan was the varied responses that we had as a group. I heard myself in there, I heard what other people in my group had said, and I'm only guessing, of course, from that the other 3 tables were heard. Unfortunately, in the TMP, our voices were not heard in the summation. It was as if they did not exist. And the facilitator spent quite a bit of our time trying to convince us otherwise of what we had suggested. I was told, well, maybe it's in his notes when he did his summation notes, and was able to read those notes, and our voices were not in there either. So I am concerned about the TMP in the sense of are all our voices actually really being heard? It feels way too template-y to me. There's aspects of it, like with sidewalks, that are not Littletonized. For instance, in my neighborhood, which is just your typical neighborhood, it talks about this is an area in some places where adults will fear to walk, but only walk there because they have to. But I'm watching kids ride their bike and walking back and forth with no problems. So I do have some issues with the Transportation Master Plan, and I am hoping that in the process going forward, that we will be heard, all of us, not just those who happen to agree with what is going on at the moment. I am voting yes for this. The Pell is my reasoning for the TMP because we need that to protect our city. So yes, but I am very concerned that not all voices are heard in the transportation plan. So that's my comments.
Thank you. Well, this has been a long 18-month process. Some would say that the process was too quick. I would agree somewhat. But I think the city has done a wonderful job in reaching out to all segments of the community via the internet, town hall meetings, lectures, booths at fairs, speaking at neighborhood gatherings, news releases. Quite in all my years' experience on the Planning Commission, this has been by far the best outreach program for gathering information from the citizens of Littleton. To recap the last 18 months, we had 8 months going through the envisioning process, which I have always said was written by the citizens of Littleton, and the city and our consultants, all they did was put sentence structure and punctuation to the public input. Now we've had a year creating the comp plan and the transportation master plan, and I think it's a wonderful document. We've been working as a city with an existing outdated comp plan that was last completely written when Carter was still president. I think times have changed since then. I had a full beard, 20 pounds lighter, and that's long gone. We've never had a master transportation plan. A private company working without a plan would shortly be out of business. The TMP is what I call a honey-do list with a multitude of projects that will require prioritization and a hunt for additional funding. The city has operated for the last 20 years with a comp plan document that is obsolete and has forced the Planning Commission, council, and city staff to be reactive, as has been said many times, reactive rather than proactive. I often have said that the Planning Commission has been in the past not really a planning commission, but a reactive commission. These documents will start to change that. There are those that say that the comp plan is not detailed enough. That is not the intent of this comp plan, or really should be of any comp plan. A comp plan normally is a 20,000-foot overview of current conditions, challenges, and opportunities that will shape our city's future for the next 20 years. This comp plan, I was going to say finishing the comp plan here is what I call just the end of the beginning. There's lots more work to be done. The next phase will be digging in, as been mentioned, digging heavily into the zoning code and the zoning map. They work in concert, although I disagree with doing them all at the same time. I like to do them consecutively. Comp plan and a zoning code is basically salt and pepper. They are walking hand in hand. It's been mentioned tonight that the comp plan is a living document. Once the zoning code and map review is complete, the city is committed to going, looking at the, going back and correcting weaknesses exposed during the zoning code rewrite and making the necessary tweaks. And they've also committed to a relook at the comprehensive plan and a total rewrite every 5 to 10 years. I think for Littleton, 5 years is probably aggressive. Littleton operates a little slower. Maybe 10 years would be much better than the 40 years we've been living with. I'd like to compliment our consultants, Kending Keast Collaborative, for their fine work. I put this in bold. They did things the old-fashioned way. They listened. I'd also like to thank the planning office, including Jennifer Hinginger. Kathleen Osher was a fantastic job of organizing the actual work for the comp plan, and the rest of the planning staff for their hard work. Also, kudos goes out, which was mentioned in one of the speakers, kudos goes out to the community or the Citizens Review Committee. I was a part of that. We met 6 times, and it was lively and free-flowing, and it was a lot of fun. We did a lot of work. And most importantly, I'd like to thank all the citizens. It was breathtaking to see the amount of feedback, the interest that we've got, which in providing vital input that on how our city will face the next 20 years. Lastly, just a reminder, and I'll read this, what all of us have created will be just forgotten words and studies sitting on a dusty shelf without updates and implementation. There's a lot of those dusty plans sitting in the planning office as we speak. Bruce, you had an amendment.
I do. All right. I move that the following language be added to action E and T2 on page 62 of the comprehensive plan, if you want to.
Could you give us a second to look at?
Absolutely.
Page 62?
Yes.
Okay. This will take a
Got it
second.
here if you want to look at it, Robin.
Okay.
Might be quicker.
Let's wait a minute. And we're still hunting here.
Oh, I circled it so I could find it. Oh, you forgot to mention in your summation that, not only did you have a full beard and 20 pounds lighter, but your hair was dark.
Yes. What's your point?
Just, clarity.
Those E and T number which?
2.
2.
That's, what, 2/3 of the way down, right?
Yes.
Under actions? Go ahead.
Correct. Okay? I move that we add language that says we evaluate and establish community job creation goals as a strategic dimension focused on attracting and retaining key employment sectors and businesses through land use planning policies. I can read it again if you like.
Please.
Excuse me, Commissioner Stallman, can you clarify again? Are you talking about policy, action, or goal?
Action.
Action.
Action,
So action E and T2.
Correct.
Action E and T2.
Correct.
Are you leaving the language that's there now and adding to it?
Correct.
Okay.
Like the second sentence.
Yes.
All right, so repeat the second sentence.
Okay. Evaluate and establish community job creation goals as a strategic dimension focused on attracting and retaining key employment sectors and businesses through land use planning policies.
Okay. We have a motion. Any discussion? Or we have a second.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
I'd say sort of what I said during my comments, which is I think this closes the loop between the assumption that we make land use decisions that ultimately involve positive economic outcomes. And this helps us get some quantification around that and some, as I said, a strategic dimension that allows us to gauge how successful we are in terms of generating incremental economic development through our land use activities under ideal laboratory conditions.
Mr. Chairman, would you consider a suggestion from the peanut gallery, the consultant side?
I'm sorry, something from the peanut gallery? What?
A suggestion that if that amendment is offered, that it potentially be added to Action 16 instead of Action 2. 16 deals with preparing an economic development plan for the city, and that is part of the intended work there, is to think about job creation goals, some of the things you've mentioned in your commentary. Action 2 is more about the day-to-day activities of the department and supporting businesses in the community, not so much a study item or it's kind of what I think you're framing. 16 is already a pretty wordy item, as you can see, but I think it's the better place for this language. So just a suggestion.
I'm fine with putting it under E&T, Action E&T 16 instead of 2.
So you'll change your motion then?
Well, yes, that'd be fine, yes.
And how does the second feel about it?
Very friendly.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Could you reread what you said again?
One more time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Evaluate and establish community job creation goals as a strategic dimension focused on attracting and retaining key employment sectors and businesses through land use planning policies.
I think an important word there is retaining, rather than always seeking new.
I agree with that.
Robin, you're fine?
Yeah, I was just reading 16 to see if if what you're saying was in there, and I don't think it is. I think it would be an addition to what is already in there.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Vote on the amendment, please.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I would just say that I think Bruce picked up on an important issue that I had been thinking about in terms of the balance of residential and commercial uses that are encouraged or driven by a comprehensive plan, and how a sustainable economy is kept intact through the comprehensive plan. So I think it's well worded. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Any other comment? Time to vote.
This is on the amendment.
This is on the amendment.
Yeah, on the amendment,
Yes.
sorry. Yeah, this is the amendment.
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Next, we have any other discussion on the main motion? If not, time to vote.
Motion as amended.
The motion as amended.
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Thank you all. We have a little bit of extra business to attend to. Any staff report?
None at this time.
Sorry?
I said none at this time.
Okay. Commissioner comments? Seeing none.
Can you turn off the board, please?
Can I have another study session tonight?
You want another study session tonight? Okay. Glutton for punishment, okay.
Exactly.
And shall we reread the 400 pages for a quiz tomorrow? Yes. Okay. No. Chair has no comments, so we are adjourned. Whew, that is